All right. Good afternoon. We're going to begin the presentation in a few moments. My name's Lou Marcocha. My title at the university is Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, and I'm very appreciative of all you folks coming out and being here for the open forum that we're going to have today. This presentation will be made by Sasaki Associates. That's the firm that has been selected to assist the university with its Campus Master Plan. Another phrase for Campus Master Plan is Campus Framework, so if you see either title, they're both the same. It's my pleasure today to introduce Bree Hensoldt. Bree's the project manager from Sasaki and will speak to us today about the analysis that's taken place. Some of you may recall that at our first session a while back, talked to us about how they were going about gathering information, surveys, meeting with folks, committees, groups, individuals, and that was the first stage. So today will be to speak about the analysis and where they are with that, what kind of results they've got from gathering information, and then in April, Sasaki will come back, and at that time they'll talk to us about their ideas and next steps forward. So I'm very appreciative that Bree's here today. Her flight got canceled, so she and a colleague got in a car early this morning and drove here from Boston. So we're very appreciative that she made it here. Otherwise, I was going to have to tell you what I did this summer. So we're very happy. Bree, it's all yours.
Thanks, everyone, and I'm really appreciative of all of you coming here today as well. I think for us, this framework plan is a really exciting opportunity for the university to think about the future, but it really depends a lot on good input and participation by the community, so it means a lot to have all of you here today. As Lou said, this is one step in a multi-step process. When we were here in the fall, we presented about some of the feedback we'd already gotten from the community. I think hopefully many of you participated in one of the surveys that went out, the My Campus survey, and so we reported back on that. And since then, we've been integrating that into our broader analysis. And that's what I'm going to present to you today, an analysis of the physical framework of Syracuse's campus. And then we're going to be back again, as Lou said, in April, and we're going to be focusing then on the ideas. That's a really exciting part of the process where we have to think about what the future looks like, what can we test, what buildings need improvement, what landscape infrastructure or structures need enhancement. And so that's going to be a really fun forum, and what we're going to do then is host it as an open house and welcome all of you to react to our ideas and to give us your own so that we make sure that it's all incorporated. Then at the end, we're going to think about how you really get it done. So we can have all these grand visions, but we have to have a clear path for implementation, and we have to have a feasible plan so that Lou and others can move it forward and really implement some of the great ideas we hope to come out of this. Today, I'm going to focus on the physical framework of Syracuse's campus before we talked about kind of the community perspective and how you all use it, but today is really about the physical makeup. That means we're looking at the campus history, the campus landscape, the experience of the place in terms of the different uses and the different types of districts that have formed over time across the campus, both main campus and south. And then we're going to talk about how all of that kind of adds up into what we call a framework, the existing framework today. And that's really the structure that we're building on and trying to reinforce or enhance going forward. I'm going to start with the category of identity and traditions, and to us that's about your legacy, your history, how the campus has formed over time, but it's also about some of the civic infrastructure that really gives the campus its frame. That's the landscape, the circulation systems. And so we'll start looking back in time to the campus's formation. And this is an image today, but what we know from looking at the campus today is that you can look at this and you can see a lot of the history embedded in it. Syracuse University grew up on the hill, a hill that was a farm, and it had a strong relationship to the city and the lake, Lake Onondaga further ahead. So that's a pattern that we'll see going forward, this important link between a university, a city, and its ecological systems. And the university grew up alongside the city of Syracuse, so it's interesting to look at the two places and kind of trace the different epics and patterns over time. I'm going to explain this because there's a fair bit of information on one slide. If you look at the blue line, this kind of blue line that has a quick jump, that's the city population. So the city of Syracuse, we know, grew a lot in the 1800s and early 1900s. And then, as many American cities, particularly in this region, it tapered off in terms of population. But what we see now is an era of stability, a population that's leveled out and is kind of holding steady. What you see down in orange is how the campus's population has grown and changed over time. And it responds a lot to what's happening in the broader economy and in the broader nation, or even the world. We see industrial growth, we track growth of urban development, the era of the automobile, and as we go through all these different eras in the university's history, you'll see how each of those broader trends really impact who you are today. There's a couple of sharp spikes you can see in that this here as the campus grew from 3,000 to 15,000, and then again from 8,000 to 18,000, reflect broader trends of kind of post-war population. So it's really interesting to kind of see who you are yourself at your core identity, and then also how that relates to the city around you and to the country. The university itself began in the 1870s on a farm on a hill. And you can see the very first building that came in as the university's anchor is the Hall of Languages, a building that still today is one of your most strongest identity pieces of architecture and kind of a heart of the campus. What's so interesting to me, though, is at the same time that the Hall of Languages came and anchored a campus on the hill, the campus reached an arm out into the city as well, and Walnut Park and the Highlands neighborhood were formed at that very same time. You can see, looking back, the original Hall of Languages and how it had a strong formal architecture, a strong symmetry, both in the building itself and the landscape around it. And today, because of that kind of great history of the architectural design and the building itself, it still is a really important building on your campus and marks really one of the gateways and front doors. A much sunnier day than today. In the next decades that followed, we see another important formation for the campus's form, and that's the old row that was formed by Crouse College and Tolly, forming the front lawn in front and kind of framing with the Hall of Languages the front door of the campus. At the same time, the old oval takes shape in what we now know as the quad. So here you can see Old Row along the hill. In the 20s, it was a great period of growth in terms of building development. One of the things that we see is that dormitories came onto campus, and those leapt across University Place, and so there were 2 dormitories kind of reaching out into the city. A lot of other buildings also came online, including Archbold, the Carnegie Library, and Bone, buildings that are still around today and give a lot of shape to the quad. The very first traces of what we now have as the Dome also began as a stadium was placed on the core campus. So you had an integration of living, recreation and athletics, and learning all happening in one place, all very much in close proximity. And here you can see that kind of strong formal formation of these 3 buildings along the quad. When we look at landscapes, we see that oftentimes they're formed by the relationship not just of the landscape itself, but of a landscape to the buildings that surround it. In the 30s, this was a time when the campus tried to really give shape to itself and develop a coherent identity. It had grown and changed a lot over the past 50 years of its life, and so campus plan came into shape, and you can see gave a lot of thought to the formal campus landscape. So the quad changed from the oval to a formal quad, the quad that we have today. The College of Medicine also came on in this era, forming a strong neighbor and a strong partnership that would grow over time. And you can see, looking at this master plan, the idea for the quad that we now have today, and also Hendricks Chapel, where we are right now. As we saw when we looked at that timeline at the beginning, the events that surround us very much impact our physical place and how universities and cities respond. And so after World War II, we saw a huge impact on colleges and universities nationwide, and the student population grew, and at Syracuse it more than doubled. So that created a great demand for more space to put these students both for learning and also for living. So what the university did was needed to quickly respond and brought in some temporary housing or temporary academic buildings west of the quad right here. And then also, if we look at the South Campus, introduced a lot of prefabricated housing that is the legacy of the housing that you have on South Campus today. And you can look at the view from South Campus to the main campus, to the city, and again to Onondaga Lake, that strong continuum and fantastic views from these two portions of the university on the hills. In the 50s and 60s, across the country, again, we could see a trend, and here it was thinking about urban renewal and how do we modernize our cities? How do we make them a place where people could coexist with cars? It was a big rise in car ownership. And so I-81 was introduced at this point, and you can see it running this gray line to the west of the campus, and it's made a big impact on how the campus relates to the city. At the same time, the campus needed to densify, and so you can start to see some of the liner buildings like physics coming in and surrounding the quad. The quad that was imagined as this larger space now has a secondary liner of buildings introduced within it. So what's interesting is that all of these elements that at one point in time are intentional grow and evolve, and so universities, like cities, are very much always in constant evolution and changing. And here with an aerial, you can see the huge impact that I-81 had in the relationship of the downtown to the campus core, and also of the building of the parcels immediately next to the infrastructure. It wasn't just the highway, but it's the sides next to it that get changed. In the 70s and 80s, this was a time of reinvestment and starting to think about sustainability and how do we have sustainability both in the environment and also financially. So the campus looked at ways that they could strengthen the core and also find ways to have kind of financial endurance. If you think about the 70s across the country, you also know that it's a time when the environmental movement really started to take hold both inside of classrooms, but also in terms of how we think of how we consume resources. Well, while there was that idea of financial sustainability, there was also still a lot of building happening, and this is when the Dome came on, Shine and Bird, major buildings that really support athletics, campus life, and the student experience. And so here you can see the strong impact of the Dome on the overall configuration of the main campus and the relationship of the Dome to Mount Olympus. As we look to the most recent decades, those from the 90s and to where we are today, we see, again, a renewed engagement with the city and this idea of the campus and the city intertwined, something that was always part of the legacy from the most early moments, but really renewed at this time. A lot of investment in the area north of University Place, new buildings and reinvestment in existing buildings, and you can see a long list of new buildings that came on over the past 25 years. One of the other elements of that time was an investment, again, in design and a re-entrenching in wanting to have strong architecture and an expression of your place and an expression of a place that values quality and design as part of its identity, going all the way back to the original, the original buildings in the old row, spanning to the contemporary buildings that we see today, as well as contemporary landscapes like the Orange Grove. And investing in design means not just buildings, but also civic infrastructure, and trying to think about elements like the connective corridor that was part of that era and time as well, realizing that people need to use the roads not just for cars like we were designing in the era of I-81, but also for biking and pedestrian access. So that time span from the 1870s to today has been a really rich process of growth and evolution. And what you see is that that's happened not just for Syracuse, but for all the neighborhoods and districts surrounding the medical district, the downtown, the neighborhoods. So it's a really richly patterned and mixed-use zone within which Syracuse exists. You can see the main campus where we are, and then South Campus, surrounded by dense neighborhoods to the east, the medical district to the north and to the west mostly, and then the big role that the cemetery and the other other city landscapes like Thorndon Park have as being near neighbors. And here you can see how that plays out a little more clearly and closely. The University neighborhood, Thorndon Park, Walnut Park, and Marshall Street, SUNY ESF, and Upstate Medical, all kind of partners within the mix of the district that Syracuse lives in. I'm going to move now from looking back to looking at today and looking really closely at the landscape structure. We see the landscape structure as one of the most critical backbones of the university. And it's not just about the quad outside or a discrete landscape, but about the whole topographical and hydrological systems that undergird the landscape around you. So we'll start looking big, and then we'll go small. This is taking a look at the campus, which again are these black buildings. Every building you see in black is a Syracuse University building. So the main campus and the South Campus. And if you see green on the map, that means it's less of a slope. So we start to get into very steep slopes when you see the dark reds. It's a gradient. And what that tells us is a couple of things. It tells us how water flows. It also tells us where views are. It tells us where it's easier to build, for example. So you can see downtown kind of sitting in a valley, and the strong impact of the drumlins and the really dramatic topography around the university, on both of its campuses. And here we can see how that kind of impacts water runoff. So the main campus and South Campus are in two different watersheds. The main campus is in the Onondaga Creek, and the south is in the Butternut Creek watershed. The Onondaga Creek is the primary drainage way to Onondaga Lake. So Onondaga Lake, again, we saw in those early images off in the distance, but there's a clear connection in terms of stormwater runoff between the campus and the lake. And if we look at the landscape as well at the big scale in terms of tree canopy, we often think of campuses as kind of oases in the city. It's a chance to have larger landscapes like you have here with the quad or the front lawn. You operate at a bigger scale than a small individual parcel. But it also means that you have larger buildings, you have larger surface parking lots. And so we can take a look at tree canopy and see that on the main campus there's about 10% tree canopy in terms of, this is overall coverage, percent of the campus that is covered with canopy. And on the South Campus, 37%. So, tree canopy helps a lot with stormwater management because a tree can capture and hold a lot of water within its leaves. It also helps with heat island effect during warmer times of the year, and a lot of other environmental and human impacts. The city of Syracuse is really advanced in terms of their stormwater management and a lot of their sustainability initiatives, and they have an overall target of 30%. So South Campus is in line with that, and it looks like there's some opportunity for thinking about maybe where we could enhance that or improve that on the main campus. This one today is particularly near and dear to my heart, thinking about wind and snow and the weather patterns and how that impacts the type of spaces that we want to create. There's a lot that architecture and landscape can do to mitigate some of the harsh climate effects. If we look at Syracuse and where you are positioned and what, on a science level you're dealing with, Syracuse has predominantly winds from the northwest, and they're really strong in winter. And they're also really strong in the daytime. You can see that here and here. So really cold winter winds. Also really interesting is that snowfall has been increasing, and we can look at that charted over time. It's been increasing about 3/4 of an inch over this course from 1915 to 2000. So we all feel that, and we have to plan for that in terms of how service access happens, parking, how do we get rid of snow, how do we coexist and keep our doors open when it's a day like today. And then how do we create spaces or buildings that can help connect you from a cold space to a cold space so you have some refuge. We're going to look now at the smaller scale of the campus and zoom in and look at the different landscape types that make up the landscape structure. So it's not just the quad to us. There's a whole host of different typologies, and we'll tell you how we categorize those. First, one of the most iconic landscapes is the front lawn. It's one of your first visions of Syracuse's campus. And it's a really distinct landscape because, while it's a very formal landscape, it's not one that's occupied really that much by people. It's not really a social landscape. One of your main social landscapes is the quad. It's designed to be a gathering space, but a formal gathering space, and one that's really kind of the heart of campus. And then ringing all the different spaces surrounding the rest of campus are what we're calling plazas and courtyards and smaller quadrangles. And these are places that are also social, really important social landscapes that help to create community within academic groups and academic buildings, or a community within residential districts. So you often have plazas and courtyards associated with specific buildings. Athletics and rec are also really important parts of the landscape structure, and we think of them more as functional landscapes. They have really specific demands in terms of configuration and layout, and really specific patterns of use. And finally, parking has a huge impact on the landscape. We think of it oftentimes just as leftover space, but as planners, we really have to plan for parking to make sure that there's an adequate supply and that it's in the right places. We think also of circulation, the roads and paths, as part of the landscape structure itself. I think there's a statistic that within a city, about 20 to 25% of all the space is dedicated to roads. So it's not something that we can forget about. It's a huge part of an impression of a place. But it doesn't mean that every street is created equal. It means that we want to look and understand which streets are important for moving large groups of traffic, and which parts are more pedestrian scale. Where do we want to kind of neck down? So if we look at Marshall Street, that's a really pedestrian scale space, whereas Comstock and some of the other streets have really important vehicular connection rules for the university. And transitional space, this is kind of everything, all the in-between space. On your campus, it's a lot of steep slopes. If you think of the area between the West Campus and the core campus, a lot of land, but not a lot of usable space. But it can be a really important open space to think of in terms of stormwater management function or other environmental functions. And here we'll look at the character of some of those spaces. So remember the front lawn, how that creates such an important front door address. A very formal plaza on your campus. Not all plazas are this formal. Circulation space, how sometimes just changing the pattern of the paving or the pattern of the roads can make a big impression in terms of marking this as a place that's meant for pedestrians, not just for cars. And the connective corridor, a really thoughtful landscape installation that's also functionally meant to move bikes and give them a really safe place to be. Here's that transitional space. What's interesting about that is that if we click ahead, we'll see that transitional space is actually 30% of your whole campus. So imagining that if we think of streets as 20% often, transitional space as 30%, that's half of your campus. That's not the quad, that's these other important spaces that we want to think about. And now I'm going to move on to connectivity. And connectivity is thinking about how we get quickly to our classes that we need to get to, or how we connect between South and Main campus, or how Syracuse is positioned within the broader region. You can see that it's well served by a lot of major roads, quickly accessible to the airport, right off of I-81, and currently the state is looking at I-81, trying to imagine how they might recast it or improve it. And so we're looking closely at some of those ideas to understand how that will impact the university as its neighbor. One of the other things that the road system sets up is a series of gateways. And if you look at the little blue arrows that we've indicated, those are kind of the key gateways to the campus. We think of them as the threshold when you know that you're entering Syracuse University. And for Syracuse, it's very clear that your main campus is sited on a hill, but you have thresholds much earlier. You have gateways much earlier. So there's an important gateway on University Ave several blocks north. How do we start to signal that you're entering a campus district even before you formally step onto Syracuse's ground? Here's one of those gateways. You can look at this and maybe not quite yet understand that you're near or adjacent to Syracuse's campus. So how do some of these streets become better streets that are more welcoming and more seamlessly part of a campus? Similarly, as we're on Comstock near the athletics district, the parking that's needed for those functions also kind of mars the gateway and the first impression. So we want to think carefully about how we can mitigate some of those needs. Also at Skytop Road, an area that, as we saw, developed as a response to the need to house a lot of students coming very quickly on campus, now has a really suburban feel, not a feel that you associate with an urban university. And you can see that within the streetscapes as well. There aren't sidewalks, all those things that signal a walkable community. It's a really different space, right, when we get down to the urban area around the main campus. This is the Adams Street Gateway near the medical district. A much tighter street zone, much more densely built up on either side, and so as a pedestrian, you have a really different feeling and sense of place. And here we can see that again. So it's not seamless everywhere. Again, parking lots and setbacks, parking garages. We have to be really thoughtful about buildings and building entries to make sure that we create great streets surrounding the campus. And transit is something we heard a lot about. I think you probably heard that reported back to you last time if you were here at the first open forum, because it's something we heard a lot about in my campus. We've looked at the transit system, and I think we're starting to think about some ways that you might improve it, both in terms of amenities at the stops and also in terms of frequency. What happens over time with shuttle routes and transit routes is that they begin as sort of a point-to-point destination, origin and destination goal, and then they evolve. And so a new development happens and we add that loop on, and you end up with really inefficient systems over time. So we're trying to take a look again at what might be the most efficient way to think about some of these shuttle links, because we've heard that the buses are spread out and they're packed, so there's an inefficiency and a kind of underservice that's happening. We've also heard that it's not a very welcoming climate within to wait for a bus, so there's a lot of things that disincentivize you to use them. The City Bicycle Network, we've shown you the connective corridor, but there's a lot more opportunity, and the city itself is looking at putting bike lanes into a lot of the streets that are surrounding the campus. So these are existing routes, and then also there's a lot of imagined routes as well. So we're trying to knit into that existing structure. One of the things we did learn from the survey is that not a lot of people bike here, and certainly with the hills and the harsh climate, there's a lot of things that might persuade one not to, but it can be a great incentive, and a lot of campuses across the country have put in different infrastructure that supports it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to increase bike ridership here. And you can see, infrastructure like the University Avenue cycle track really supports that, but it has to link into a bigger system. Here we're going to look at we looked at those photographs of streets before, and now we'll look at really how they work from a streetscape design perspective. When you're thinking about a bike lane, you can't just add a bike lane to a street. You have to think about how that impacts the parking, how that impacts the vehicular lanes, and also the setback. So if we look at the connective corridor, for instance, they've knit a lot of things together. It's a place that brings together the bike lane, a pedestrian zone, a tree zone, and all of those into one kind of identity space, giving University Ave to the north a really great feel. Waverly Ave, you can see this is cut this section is cut right here by Shine, is kind of impacted by some of the land uses along it that are large, have a lot of service requirements. A student center requires a lot of service, or parking lots that don't always have active frontages and kind of welcoming faces. So Waverly, while it's one of your most important streets, today doesn't have a great sense of place and doesn't make a really welcoming address. We want to think about how redevelopment or rethinking some of those building facades could make that a better place. And similarly, if we look at Comstock, we see a really wide street section here, large front lawns, large setbacks, and different changes of topography. And so that impacts kind of how that felt as much more of a suburban stretch of road, and not one that felt knitted into the city campus that you've created on the main campus. If we look back at the My Campus survey that hopefully many of you filled out, we can see that pedestrian activity is really everywhere across the main campus and also the city streets. So it's important, if we think about Waverly and the character that we saw with the back doors, with the parking garages, that's actually a place that's really important for pedestrian movement. So it is really important that we get those streets right. You can also see Euclid Avenue, one of the other key connectors from the neighborhood into the campus. So what that tells us is that there's a hierarchy of pedestrian flows, and there's some really obvious ties between housing, where people live, and where those main connections are. So that's why Waverly, University Place are so important, and Euclid Ave, because so many people live in this university neighborhood to the east. As we think about West Campus, where there is some housing today, maybe more in the future, we'll also have to think about strengthening those pedestrian links. And parking, something that always comes up, and we try to think about and anticipate and make sure that we solve. We know that today parking is happening largely in kind of 3 different districts. So the West Campus, really important parking reservoir for you, as well as the area kind of integrated into the campus-city relationship that you have north of University Place. We often, when we go to universities, want to see parking that's outside of the core, so you already have that today. I think the challenge going forward is to think about how, if we're redeveloping surface lots for new uses that you need, how do we then provide parking in an efficient way where you need it, so that we're not taking away parking, but we're just redistributing. And on the South Campus has a pretty inefficient use of land, so we'll be thinking more about kind of better using that land for new development patterns. You can see a lot of it surface parking and a big reservoir parking today. So we've looked a lot at the purely physical dynamics of the campus, at the history of how it's grown, its landscape, and the circulation systems. I want to shift for a moment and look at some of the dimensions of learning on campus that aren't really focused on what happens inside the classroom, but how the whole campus supports holistic learning and student development. So student experience has a lot to do with student life, and that's one of the segments of campus that we're thinking about the most, I think, and that we've heard almost the most about from the different communities and from our committee. The Shine Student Center today is kind of the heart of your student life, but it's also very distributed. If you look at this map, each of these symbols represents a different type of student interaction or experience, ranging from dining and cafes to outdoor spaces. So we want to think about this distribution, and also, if we reposition Shine going forward, or we think any differently about recreation, really look at all the other places where those programs are happening, maybe in smaller zones, in fitness within a residential hall, or a cafe within an academic building. And when you look inside the buildings, too, to see how they're functioning, one of the other things we really believe is that the public spaces within buildings, everything highlighted in yellow, is kind of a lobby space or a circulation space. Those public spaces that are shared, that don't belong to anyone, really belong to everyone. And so we want to make the most of those spaces. We call them soft spaces. and kind of improve the quality and make them places where people feel like they can hang out and gather and where interaction can happen. So if you think of some of, like looking at Link Hall, we can see right fronting on the quad that there's a lot of circulation space. Could that become a great space for everybody, for interaction, for imagination, that could encourage more disciplines to come together? So we'll be looking across campus to see where some of the great opportunities are to improve those softer spaces. And I know we've thrown a lot of information at you. What I'm going to try to do now is synthesize it and kind of paint a picture of what we see as the overall framework of the campus. And this is really what we're building on and we're looking to as we think about different ideas for academic growth and enhancement in buildings and building spaces, as well as student life and residential experiences. So we call this the civic structure of Syracuse University. And if we think back to the history, we think it's really rooted in some of those very early moves, that the Hall of Languages on the Hill is one of your most important buildings still today, with University Avenue and the new connective corridor highlighting that even more, kind of marrying the new idea of the connective corridor with the old idea of the Hall of Languages. And that Highland Park and Walnut Park are really important as well. University Place and the old row and the front lawn are kind of also sacred spaces to us in a way, places that are really part of your identity. And each of the buildings along the old row really today does still contribute to that, the creation of that place. The framing of the quad that happened slowly and incrementally over time is fairly intact today. Some of the liner buildings we know don't contribute in the same way, maybe the physics building in a different place than was originally intended, but we can really see that there's an intact campus quad and that that's a really important part of your landscape. When we look at where the campus meets the city, in the area around Waverly Avenue, and if you go out University Avenue, I think that's where it gets really interesting and where there's a ton of opportunity to think about Syracuse's front door and kind of your gateway impression. Because what we see is that there's a lot of student life uses. So there's a lot of traffic, of university traffic on the area between Waverly Avenue and University Place. But they don't have the greatest front doors. The back door of Byrd Library, the back door of Shine, a lot of parking, a lot of service access. So if this is a really important bridge between you and the city, could that be even better? Could this be a place where we celebrate that connection? And here we see again a snowy day where we kind of have that, the way that Shine meets the street and then a parking garage across from it. Similarly, on University Avenue, it's a mix as well. We do have the connective corridor and investment in streetscape, but we don't have the greatest buildings yet meeting it. So the hotel with its parking garage has more of a, hotels are challenging building forms, and so there's a lot of service and drop-off required. It doesn't always make the greatest urban neighbor. Can we rethink that? Similarly, there's a lot of underutilized spaces, either associated with parking garages, surface parking, or even the frontages of some of these buildings. And we see a similar opportunity over on the West Campus, where there's a lot of parking, some housing. We see a great opportunity to rethink that area and really build community there. We've heard a lot about how that area of campus is isolated and sort of cut off, and that's a real challenge around topography, around access, but I think one that we can make great strides to improve, especially as we rethink the district around the dome. And so there's a possibility to connect what's happening with the dome and the activity on the academic core of campus with what we think could be a really exciting new district on the West Campus. We'll be bringing you some ideas at the next forum and hope to get your feedback there. So when you put that all together, you can see that there is a tremendous amount of opportunity for Syracuse in the future. There is a great history that has shaped a really intact main campus with a strong sense of landscape, a strong sense of historic buildings, as well as contemporary architecture that gives it a really unique sense of place. And then in the areas surrounding, a real chance to kind of take that identity and figure out how to strengthen it. We're looking forward to doing that over the next few weeks. So if we look ahead, next time we'll be back and we'll be having more of an open house format. That means that me and my colleagues will be here. We'll have ideas to show you, and we'll hope to be able to talk kind of one-on-one about them and get your feedback in more of an informal setting. And what we're going to be doing leading up to that is really trying to define and finalize the principles that are driving the plan. It always helps to have a set of principles that we all know that each decision that the university makes going forward will reinforce the principles. We'll also be working to finalize a program, and the program is really what are the pieces that are going to change, what are the buildings that need the most improvement, what are the uses or programs that are growing and need new types of spaces, different types of spaces, what's the future of athletics and recreation, what types of spaces do they need to really thrive in the way that they have been. And then create a framework for the future. You saw the framework of today, and you see how it has incredible moments in some places and incredible possibility for improvement in others. So we'll be creating different frameworks for how the future might look, hoping to improve and strengthen some of those pieces, and developing a couple of options that you can give us feedback on. We really hope it'll be open dialogue. And with that, I want to thank you all and also welcome questions. I think we have a couple of people with microphones, so if you have a question, they'll find you.
Hi. I know I have a question, but it's just a thought. When you are talking about bike lanes, I'm a cyclist, but I would never cycle around campus. When they built the bike lane, it's gorgeous, but it's not functional. So I think I love the idea of bike lanes, but if they could also think about the safety of it. When you are coming down University Ave on that bike lane, there's no safe way to go left. I mean, you're crossing, they blocked it off, so there's no way I've seen like so many like really dangerous situations. So when they start thinking about bike lanes, which I think is a great idea, to really think about the safety of it and the function of it. So there's not going to be a lot of confusion. That's just my feedback.
That's great, thank you. It's interesting because bike lanes on some level seem simple, right, to get right, but they're really not. And so you're right, we have to look at it really closely. And in some ways, the idea of bike lanes integrated in urban settings is still kind of in its experiment phase. So everywhere is doing it differently. There's not a single right way yet. We have to figure out what the right way is for all the roads around here. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for that. I had a question about accessibility and the Americans with Disabilities Act. The campus is very open, but it doesn't seem like a lot of the buildings have been retrofitted to be accessible. And I guess the question is, in what ways do you think you can embrace what you need to do legally with creating a more inclusive campus?
I think so. That's obviously a huge challenge for lots of universities who have aging buildings that were built to different standards and don't have that integrated. So that's something that I think Syracuse knows a lot about and is thinking about and trying to phase in over time. I think with some of the landscape improvements and also some of the future buildings, we have some real opportunities to kind of make leaps, and really improve some areas that are particularly challenged today. So a new building can help to, if it's thoughtfully sited, can help to bridge a difficult topography or, even kind of fill a gap as we're waiting on meeting the need in every single building over time. If there are some places that are particularly challenging, it would be great to know where those are so we can think about if some of the landscape improvements or new developments could kind of help take a quicker leap as all of the smaller changes are happening over time. I don't know if that answered your question. Okay.
Hi. Thank you for looking at the buses. Those are a big issue. Sorry.
Oh, there you are. Okay, thanks.
Those are a big issue. I would also strongly encourage you guys to think about the seasonality needs of buses around here. The fact that it is walkable 7-8 months of the year, but it's not the other time. And then I also wanted to reiterate the bikes the bike issue. It surprised me that you said it wasn't a biking campus because during the spring, summer, and fall, bikes are locked up 2-3 deep in the bike racks. But what worries me, once again, is the safety issue and the fact that while the city considers something like Euclid Avenue having a bike lane, there are cars parked in that for
Right,
24 hours a day. It's really, they've painted a little bike on it, but that's it.
Yeah.
And then finally, also the fact that street parking here with the 6 p.m. switch side is a major issue, and the fact that, and these aren't, Syracuse University things, these are more city things, but the fact that for quite a lot of the roads for a couple hours each night, you can only fit one car down because there are cars parked on both sides.
Right, right. And I think the how many cars you can fit down a street is also seasonal, right? As we have the snow piling up outside, it changes how we use the roads. Thank you for the comment about biking too. I should say the My Campus survey, where we kind of saw that and thought it was lower than we might expect, is definitely not a scientific survey. So more impressions help change the perspective too.
Hi.
Oh.
I wanted to pick up on the question of Euclid Avenue, which was just raised. I was surprised in your slide of gateways to the campus that Euclid was not a gateway. It's a gateway for thousands of
Yeah,
students
you're
every
right.
day.
You're right.
And your own pedestrian map shows that it's a
Yeah.
crucial pedestrian corridor. And then when you talked about your sort of areas of focus, it's not, that side of campus is not considered also. I wonder if that was a conscious decision to leave that portion of the campus off the discussion, or will you be looking into that in the future?
No, I think we definitely are looking at that side of campus, and it's interesting because that side of campus has kind of two housing districts, right? Formal Syracuse University housing districts to the north, and then one more to the south, and then there's this area in between with Euclid Avenue. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of strengthen what's sort of more discrete elements of housing over there, and also think about that relationship to the neighborhood and to the off-campus housing, which you're right, it's a really important gateway point. So there's probably 3 nodes, right, on all 3 sides of the campus. Good point.
Hi, I'm a senior in the Setner School of Music, which is housed in Krause College. And currently, that space is no longer sufficient for us. And obviously, finding a new building for the Setner School of Music is a complicated issue. So my question is, what's the commitment to all of the current buildings and the current architecture, especially the ones that were made in the 60s and 70s that are also insufficient? And looking forward, how can we find new large spaces to better fit our programs?
Right. So I guess that's 2 separate questions. The one about, the music program, and then also buildings as a whole. So when it comes to the music program, I'll say visual and performing arts from the very beginning has been one of the programs that we've been thinking the most about or been thinking a lot about, because it's located in multiple locations. We've heard very specifically that the Krause building doesn't work acoustically for your needs now, and so that's a big purpose-built space, that has really specific needs that's not working well for you today. And at the same time, you're spread out. There's the building on the south, sort of towards South Campus on Comstock Avenue for fine arts. There's the warehouse, and then there's some buildings some sites on the main campus. So what does it mean to be disaggregated? Is it a program that wants to be embedded and have its hand in all parts of campus, or is it a program that wants to be more co-located? With either of those decisions, I think we're thinking about the quality of space. So the quality of spaces like the music performing hall, and how we, over time, try to meet some of those needs. Sometimes you need to meet a new need like that in a very specific way, but then you can backfill the old building for something else. And so we're looking at all of those kind of moving parts. And that's happening across the campus. I think we've also heard on the science side that there's a lot of quality issues in some of the wet labs, that they're not up to kind of modern standards, and that a lot of those spaces, it would be really hard to bring that same space up to contemporary standards. And so we're trying to think about that in a resource-efficient way in both cases, but also in a way that gives you the best possible academic space. So it's a complicated question, but I think one that's really driving our options.
I was pleased to see you point out Walnut Place as entrance to the campus, and an idea I've had for many years, because I've been located on the corner opposite the library, the Slutzker Center for International Services, and anchoring Walnut Place at the other end is the SU Abroad office. And I think that we could change the dynamic of the university and the community's idea of that whole area where Walnut Park is, to put gateways on either side as the entrance to Walnut on the World, or the World on Walnut Place might be the idea, and to bring a new global center, which is being talked about in the Enhancing Internationalization Work Group, and I don't know if you've had all those reports yet, but to bring together a different dimension to the university there and change that dynamic, but utilize the space in the way that nature has provided us a good opportunity to do.
Thank you. That's a cool idea. I think we're definitely thinking about that zone, and if you think of Bird Library, that didn't come on until the 70s or 80s, right? And so really changed how we anchor one end of Walnut Park. Maybe we're not done yet, so I think you're right, thinking about that is a great idea.
I actually have a question in regards to questions. It was posed like 4 questions ago about accessibility. And thinking about accessibility and inclusivity, where would you like that feedback? Because you said it would be good to know. So where should we deposit those types of inquiries or suggestions about buildings that are either non-inclusive because they don't have gender-inclusive restrooms, or they're physically inaccessible to a variety of constituencies? Like, where would you like that feedback?
That's a good question. I don't know, do we have a central place, Lou? Or, oh, here we go.
Can she repeat that?
If you can send it to the Fast Forward Syracuse website, there's a drop-down menu, right? And you can give that feedback. And as Lou said, we're kind of like one third of the Fast Forward Syracuse idea, and so that'll get fed into our process as well, but it might have applications to the other pieces as well.
I just had a question. So I'm the director, excuse me, of off-campus and commuter services, and my office is located on Ostrom Avenue, along with several other office buildings, and I was just wondering if there were any plans or are there any ideas about what's gonna be utilized for that space. There's been talks about whether or not we would stay or whether the houses would end up going away because we're not handicap accessible, and I know part of it is we're probably I'm sure we're grandfathered in under codes, but it does pose a problem for us to meet the needs of some of the students.
Yeah, I think the answer to that question probably has to do with how we think about student life as a whole on campus, and also student services. And so something that a lot of campuses do is locate uses like that either within a one-stop shop experience. So you would co-locate all the kind of public-facing student services like the registrar, the bursar, financial aid, all those pieces in one place. Make it really clear for a student because they don't always know which office they need to go to. It can be really frustrating to make multiple stops. And you know, your office could be part of that. We would have to have more of a conversation, I think, about what programs you want to be near. So if there is a sentiment campus-wide and an agreement that we want to co-locate some of those services, or we want to co-locate student organizations more closely with a rethinking of the student center, I think there'd be a big opportunity for that program to move, and certainly if there's accessibility issues, even more rationale than to have that happen, kind of accomplish 2 things at once.
There's an area between Harrison and Adams on University that's right next to University parking lot that's been dug up and gated and sort of, they have it sort of canvassed off so you're not able to see what's going on. And I just wondered what's going on there. It seems that it's been dug up for a year or 2. And also if there are any plans for the future for that area. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't know exactly which site that is you're thinking of. Yeah.
Right, University Garage, right next to that.
Yeah.
This work? Yep. There was a project where the university was working with a private developer to build a bookstore and a fitness center. There was a situation where that project did not move forward. Presently, there's a dispute on that, so it's tied up in litigation. So we can't do anything, nor can anyone do anything until it works its way through that process.
Hi, I was wondering if there is a specific charge that you have from the university that's driving your recommendations, because there's a lot of interesting analysis, but I guess it's not clear from me, having this be the first presentation I've heard on this, whether the university has a goal that they're asking you for a solution to for specific needs, like retracting its real estate footprint or solving pedestrian and parking issues, or creating a cool design for some utopian campus that is attractive to prospective students. I mean, I'm just wondering what your charge is.
Yeah, I think, well, it's a comprehensive master plan, so ultimately we're looking at all of those facets, and I think all of them kind of merge together to create the sense of place. But I think the charge, more clearly is to align the physical campus with the academic goals of the place and the kind of student development goals. And so a simultaneous effort is happening. I think you guys just had an open forum, right, about the academic strategic plan. So one of our main goals is to provide a place that supports the goals of that plan as well. We're working kind of in parallel. To us, that's, supporting the academic development of students, faculty, and staff isn't just about academic buildings or academic spaces, though. It's also about development that happens outside of the classroom. So we see those as really related.
Speaking of parking and biking issues, on Waverly and Comstock, currently the situation is you have a 2-lane place, then a parking, I guess we're going to call it a lane, and then a bike lane. The reason why I call it a lane is because a lot of people, when they're driving up there, confuse these parked cars with cars that are just stopped at a light or something like that. It's just extremely confusing for drivers.
Yeah.
And in regard to the bike lane, it has a picture of bike painted. Why don't we do what we did for connected corridors, just paint the entire thing green and put a little concrete divider there, which will clearly mark that as bike. As for the parking spaces, I have no suggestion on that, but that is a problem too. But the biking part can at least be cleared up by the green paint.
Yeah, I think this goes back to the comment earlier about bike lanes and how you have bike lanes that are functional and safe, and there isn't yet one perfect answer to that. I think it's an evolving argument across the country. So we met with the city last time, and they're thinking about it. They're also experimenting with different configurations of the streets, like you mentioned, the parking on Waverly and the parking on Comstock. And so these are experiments. I think sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, and we're all looking to see what's best. We'll be thinking about it as well. But point taken.
What I said was that was not a university initiative. The work that was done on both Comstock and Waverly was a city initiative. So the university was not controlling in terms of how it was designed and how it was put in place. I think once the city moved forward with its work, it received a lot of feedback which said this should be re-examined. So I just want people to know that this was not something that I or the folks in CPDC designed, but it's something that we're trying to work with the city and hopefully get them to make some wise modifications to. If we do something, hopefully it'll be better thought out.
We had an interesting conversation with the city and county planners about that as well, and it's still unfolding, but it's clearly will have a big impact. I think we'll have to look at it really closely in the next round as we get to options and consider that as a possible change. There's still, significant topography and a rail line, so even if it went to a boulevard condition, there'd be some challenges of a seamless connection, but it would definitely make a big difference to the West Campus. We'll be factoring that in.
And back to Suzanne's question earlier about the university's goals in doing the campus master plan, et cetera. Key thing is, it must tie in with the academic strategic plan. I mean, that's what we're all about as a university. So whatever we plan to do, it needs to work with that. This really becomes a roadmap for us, so it sets guidelines and principles, which in effect, hopefully, will direct us in terms of all the decisions that we make going forward. But when you bring in someone like Sasaki, what you're saying is, this is as good a firm as you can find nationally, has an awful lot of experience and practice in doing campus master plans. So one of the reasons you bring a group like that in is because they'll bring new thinking, they'll bring in thinking that's away and independent from the campus, they'll help us with the analysis, they'll gather information. A number of the things you may have heard about information, you might say, well, gee, I kind of understood that. But the comprehensive manner in which we went about gathering information make sure that we've listened to everyone, given everyone an opportunity to express themselves and their ideas, and then to comprehensively build that together. So we're not saying we know what the answer is, but we want to follow best practice, bring the best talent we can, so that going forward we've got a very good master plan. Now, master plans may be updated every 5 years or 10 years, right?
Yep. Usually
So that we expect that going forward we will do more and more and more of this to see where we are. This is not an exercise about this is the design for a particular building. This is more about what should be the guidelines and roadmaps as we think about buildings and other types of things that should take place on the campus.
Let me ask a question that's sort of illustrated by the graphic that's up there now. What you keep referring to as the university's front lawn no longer seems to be in the front. So my question is there any contemplation of repurposing the space and perhaps defining the, shall we say, green space that fronts the university elsewhere? But I mean, it just seems that historically that is a space that by the development around it is no longer the function it serves.
It's a great point, and I think, Lou said this is really comprehensive, and so that's one great aspect. We get to look at everything, but it's also, I think it's our job to make sure all ideas are on the table, and so thinking about the front lawn is really important. In some ways, it feels like this historic landscape that might be sacred and can we touch it, but I think you're right, we want to challenge that and see what the temperature is for any changes. You're right, it's kind of shifted from being the edge to the center now, and what does that mean? There's been the change too in University Place from being an accessible road to being a secure zone now, but could that change even more in terms of what it looks like? Does it want to be more like a plaza? Does it want to be an important landscape too? We'll be looking at that. I think that's a well-put comment.
I was wondering if you could speak to or add more perspective to your involvement with the academic strategic plan and what the relationship is between the master framework and the academic strategic plan and how they're going to be influencing each other moving forward, particularly in regards to the academic strategic plan's place in the fast forward movement.
We have, I'll let Lou answer as well if he'd like, but we have, just so you understand how this process happens, we have a committee that's kind of a cross-campus committee, so it's, it has representatives from the academic community, from the student perspective, from the student life and administration perspective. So we have a committee that's kind of a cross-cutting committee, and within that we have representation that's thinking about the academic strategic plan. And so in a way they're our liaison, and they're feeding us information, and we're also checking in periodically. While we're here on this trip, we have a meeting that's dedicated to talking about that a little bit more and where the university is at in development of their academic plan, so that we can make sure we best reflect that. I think what the physical master plan can do is to make sure that we have growth opportunities in the right sites if certain programs are identified as new programs or programs that are growth areas. Similarly for research, what's the future of research and how do we accommodate that on campus? It can be a land-intensive use, so where does that want to be, and what does Syracuse University see as its future in both those elements? So it's a pretty iterative process, but we're trying to be closely aligned.
Yes. I sit on both committees, the executive committees of each, the Campus Master Plan, the Academic Strategic Plan, and also Fast Forward. So I make sure that the folks who are doing the Campus Master Plan and Campus Framework are well aware of what's going on with the Academic Strategic Plan. In fact, just recently when the day of conversation was occurring, I checked with Provost Liz Liddy and asked if we could share the presentation with Sasaki to be courteous and make sure that could be done, which she readily agreed with. So Sasaki received all the slides from the day of conversation presentation, so all the working group information, et cetera. Jackie Grosso, who's chief lead in terms of communications for all of the three components of Fast Forward Syracuse, is invited to all the meetings. So in addition, in terms of making sure we have communications, she's aware of that also. And as was said by Bree, we have a number of folks who are from the faculty side and the deans who sit on the campus framework program. So we are really making sure that we're integrating them together. And the academic strategic plan is the lead part of the three components. The framework is here to support the academic strategic plan, as is the Fast Forward operational excellence component.
Mentioned that you're meeting with the members of the academic strategic plan. Is that meeting open to the public?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's just a couple of liaisons to fill us in,
Okay.
like Lou and the provost. I see we might be running out of time or attention. I just wanted to mention, too, that at 4 o'clock today, we'll be having another one of these right here. So if you know people who wanted to come and couldn't come now, please send them. We'll be back doing this again. Thanks, everyone.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank you all for showing up today to hear this presentation by Sasaki Associates. I think you're all aware that what we're doing today is talking about the analysis that's been taking place by Sasaki. Basically, the first forum we had spoke to folks about how they were going about gathering information, using surveys, having meetings with several folks on campus. We made sure that Sasaki has met with every dean on campus, every division leader, groups that reached out to us and asked whether they could have access. So we're really trying to make sure that this situation is fully inclusive in terms of giving people an opportunity to present information to Sasaki. So as I said, the first forum had to do with Sasaki talking about what they were doing in terms of gathering information. This session is about the analysis that is taking place, what some of their findings are in terms of assessing the information gathered. And then in April, they'll come back and talk to us about their ideas. So that's what we'll be looking forward to in April. I think everybody in the room is probably aware that the campus framework, campus master plan, whichever title you prefer, is part of the university's Fast Forward Syracuse. It's one of three components. Clearly the most important component is the strategic academic plan. That's clearly what will drive Syracuse going forward. What the framework is intended to do is to provide us a roadmap that can be consistent with and support of the academic strategic plan. Today we're very fortunate to have the project manager from Sasaki. That person is Bree Hensold. She did a great job this morning. I'm going to see if she does as good a job this afternoon, but I'm sure she will. She's very articulate, can speak extremely well and extensively about the information that has been gathered. At the end of the session, we'll provide some time for questions, and I hope you'll have some of those. So again, thank you very much. Bree, here you are. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lou. Well, thank you everybody for coming this evening. I know that there's a lot of things pulling at your time, so we really appreciate your coming to learn about where we're at in the process, and then even more, I hope that you'll have questions at the end. As Lou said, we began this with an information gathering period, but really that's going to go on throughout the whole process, and so we're having these forums so that we can get continual feedback, and that's really what's going to make this the best plan it can be for Syracuse and what's going to make it your plan. So I would encourage you to think of questions and feel free to ask, and then continue to come to these forums as we have them throughout the process. One moment. This didn't happen this morning. This is new. Okay, there we go. So I want to begin just quickly looking at the schedule. Lou gave a good recap of where we are. When we were here in the fall, we did a lot of talking to the community and also listening via surveys, via different tools. Got a good picture of where things stand today, I think. And then we've been focusing a lot of our time on looking at the place in terms of the physical campus, and that means the urban form, the architecture, the history, the landscape, the utilities, the circulation. So trying to get a complete picture. This is a comprehensive campus master plan or a comprehensive framework plan, so that means that we touch all dimensions of the campus, and we're trying to open every door. So today we're going to spend a lot of time looking at the physical analysis and what we've learned, and hopefully a new perspective on it for some of you, and then we hope also at the end you can give us a new perspective on what we've already found. We're going to come back again then in April, and this is sort of a pivot point for us as we move from analysis into ideas, which is a really exciting phase because we get to test lots of different ideas for what the future of the campus might look like. And we talked this morning or around noon with the group here about how it's really our job to test every idea. So if you have an idea for what you want to see here, tell us. In April, we're going to have an open house, and we'll have a lot of face-to-face talk at that point about your ideas, what you think of ours. So hopefully you'll come back again for that. And then after that session, hopefully we'll have a good sense of consensus about where the campus leadership and the campus community want to see the campus go in the future. And so we'll spend time thinking about developing that preferred plan in more detail, and then also the implementation strategies that the campus can undertake in terms of phasing, what comes first, what's realistic, what do we need to edit and refine, and so that'll help wrap us up in the summer. As we think about the physical campus framework, to us, it's about embodying a lot of the philosophies of the place. And so I'm going to walk through how we understand the campus today through a couple of different themes. The first one is identity and traditions. I think the identity here at Syracuse is a really richly layered and multifaceted place, and a place that really has a strong relationship with the city. So for me as an urban planner, that's really interesting and really rich, and a great tradition to build on. So we're going to walk through a bit of the history, and then an understanding of the campus landscape structure, the circulation patterns, all of which intertwine really closely the campus and the city. And then we're going to touch base on what we're calling holistic learning, which is just a quick look at our understanding of learning on the campus as outside of the classroom as well as inside. So looking at some of the student life experiences here. And then hopefully, after a lot of information, a lot of imagery, a lot of data, we're going to synthesize things and give you a picture that's starting to crystallize for us of what the important framework elements are of the campus. So to us, that's really what we want to carry through and make sure that we either, protect, enhance, or improve if there's areas of that framework that are maybe more opportunities than they are existing jewels today. So as we look first to the campus history, it's really interesting because as you look at a lot of campuses across the country, it looks like they were born of one time, and all the architecture matches. It's you know, you have tile roofs, or you have sort of a Gothic period. You can kind of get an identity of a place simply from an architecture that looks frozen in time. But what's so interesting here about Syracuse is that you can get the whole history of the place through an unfolding and evolving pattern, and it's the campus itself really reflects a long and very interesting, you know, over 100 years that you've been in educating people. So I think we're going to walk through that, and hopefully you'll start to see a real logic to how the campus has formed over time. As you look at this image too today, I think there's also an important pattern that you'll see over and over, which is the idea of the university on the hill, a relationship to the city of Syracuse downtown, and a relationship to Onondaga Lake. So keep those in mind. That's an important relationship. As we look at the university, we know that it formed over time, and it wasn't happening in a bubble, that there was a story of the city of Syracuse that was happening in parallel, and a story of our country and of the world as well. So if we look first at the blue line and the blue part of the graph, that is the population of the city of Syracuse over time. We're starting here in about 1820 and coming up to today in the 2010s. So we see that there was a really strong growth period for the city during the industrial area, and this middle period of the 30s and 40s, strong urban growth, strengthening of cities, and a growth and densification of cities that we saw across the country, especially here in the kind of industrial Rust Belt. And then we see this area of post-war urban renewal. Cities were really doing a lot of infrastructure investments, transforming themselves for good and for bad. And so we'll take a look at what that means for the city of Syracuse and what that means for the campus here. And then, there was some contracting as well within that time. But what we see as we look ahead is that the city's population has somewhat stabilized in recent years. So what does that mean for the university as you grow within this kind of stabilizing urban population? When you look at the orange line, that's you, Syracuse. I shouldn't have to tell you that the orange is you. And you can see that this is a steady climb as well, and it has some dips and dives, but overall the trajectory is one of growth to about 22,000 or 21,000 students today. And there are some key moments in there where we can see dramatic change. As you go from 3,000 students up to 15,000, imagine what those years must have been like, immense growth on the campus. And similarly, in the post-war periods, doubling from 8,000 to over 18,000. So there's some really transformative moments, and it's very interesting to look at those in the context of what's happening in the country as well. So if we go way back in time to the late 1870s when the university began, we see that it began as a university on a hill, on what was at that time farmland on the hill. And the very first building was the Hall of Languages, anchoring that kind of front door on University Place. What I think is so interesting too, that even as that very first campus was being defined on the hill, there was also an extension of the campus into the city and an arm kind of reaching out Walnut Park and the Highlands neighborhood. So a strong relationship, even at that very early moment, of the campus to this area north of it. And here you can see, the strong impression that the very first building made, which endures with you today and is still really one of the most iconic architectural buildings on your campus. A really strong, symmetrical impact it has, both in terms of the building and the landscape. And then today, how much of that image really endures. In the next 10 years or 20 years, taking us through the 1890s, we can see that more pieces of what we think of today as really important moments on campus came in. So by the end of the 1800s, we had a pretty clear picture of the front door of campus. You had the front lawn, and you had the old row with Krauss, Tolley, and the Hall of Languages. We also had the beginning of the quad. What's so interesting, I think, too, about the Syracuse University campus is it's a very strong play landscape, architecture, and buildings. So that relationship is really important here. You can see that through the legacy of Walnut Park, the front lawn, and the beginnings of the quad through the old oval, which at that time was an athletic field. And here, the strong impression and the really the importance that you feel as you walk up the hills, but you can see how iconic it was to have this old row of buildings on the hill. A lot of growth happened in the 1920s. You can probably remember that from the graph as well, and you can see it in the building development on the campus. So Old Oval changed from an athletic field into an actual campus landscape, a really important central landscape. And at the same time, we have the first notion of major athletics on the campus. You can see kind of the future footprint of the dome there. Archbold, Carnegie Library, and Bown, all kind of anchoring the back of the quad. So we start to really form landscape, both through the designation of spaces, but also through the buildings that frame them. You can see too, the campus edges are really starting to become clear, even as early as the 20s, which is amazingly 100 years ago. And here's that back wall of the quad. So as we look to the 30s, it was really a time when the campus began to think clearly about wanting to define itself through a plan and to create a coherent physical environment. After a period of growth, we always want to be thoughtful and think about what did we make? What does it look like? At this time also, the College of Medicine came on, and you can see more development north of University Place. So these dorms had already come on north of University Place, and we have additional development on Waverly. Something that has continued incrementally, that kind of development north. You can also see that that quad has been constantly evolving, and now it's become a really formal, clear landscape. Here's that landscape sited within the campus master plan, and Hendricks Chapel, where we are today, was also built. They imagined too, you can see this was imagined but not exactly realized, and north is down, that this would be a big residential district north of University Place. As we move into the 40s, it was one of the other periods in the campus's history of great expansion, and that had to do with kind of entering the post-war period. A lot of students flooding the university market and a real need for new space, both in terms of academic space and residential space, where to house all the students. And so the response was to respond quickly through temporary housing, temporary academic barracks here, north of the athletic site, and then on South Campus, prefabricated buildings that came in to house new students very quickly. But we're still left with the legacy of those buildings today, right? So it was a quick response that we now have 60 years later. Another thing that happened as we started to need more space was that this quad, which had been formed thoughtfully before, began to have an inner liner to it. So new buildings started to populate the edges of the quad, and you'll see that more in the next era as well. So here we are looking from South Campus to the main campus, to downtown, to Onondaga Lake, that kind of continuous view. You have such incredible topography here that really gives these wonderful views. In the 50s and 60s, this is when the whole country moved toward what we call an era of urban renewal. And you can see the impact of that through I-81, which came in just to the east, or just to the west of campus. We'll look at another image in a moment. The other thing that happened is the liner buildings around the quad began to fill in even more, so the impact of physics. And the challenge with this era as well is that we didn't build wonderful buildings necessarily in the 60s and 70s. We built some, but we didn't build all of them to the highest quality always. So we're left today, 50 years later, with a legacy of a lot of building, not always building that endures. So something to think about as we think about renewal and reinvestment in some of these buildings. And here you can see, speaking of renewal, you can see the impact of I-81, which is a big asset for access to the university, but also did have a big impact on the connection of the campus core to downtown, as well as kind of a 4-block wide area that laid the groundwork for the medical district, but really changed the way the university's edges relate. In the 70s and 80s, it was again a period of reinvestment and thinking about sustainability. The 70s in the US was really when the whole country turned toward an ethos of environmentalism. That was kind of the first time that came to the front, and you can see that both through thinking about resource efficiency and also conservation of financial resources. So something that was on the mind, even amidst a period, if we look at this map, of tremendous growth again. So the Dome was built during this time, as well as Shine and Bird. All three of those, you can tell, are major investments in the student life experience of the campus and the athletic experience of campus. And here, the Dome kind of iconically sited right near the quad and the academic core, a really strong relationship between the two. And finally, our last kind of era of time before today represented, I think, another strengthening of the relationship that had been going, all the way back to the beginning of the campus, of this intertwining of the campus and the city, or the intertwining of the campus and its immediate neighborhood to the north. So that's happening both through building expansion north of University Place. Remembering this happened very slowly over time, but now we have almost a full district where the university has a strong presence, as well as some thinking about new landscapes. This was a period too when there was a strong investment in design and architecture, and so if we think about the Hall of Languages all the way to these new architectural investments in the last 25 years, we can see that what you have today is a really diverse architectural language, one that's very much your own and uniquely Syracuse, and so that's a great asset. Also investments in new landscapes. This is a really formal plaza, the Orange Grove. And then investments in the city and in civic infrastructure were important too, since University Avenue is such a critical gateway right up to that Hall of Languages, the connective corridor, part of this era as well. So what that long period of kind of growth and development shows us is that the university was growing, but they weren't growing alone. They were growing with a very live and changing city as well. And so you can see that the university today is nestled in a really rich environment. Here's the main campus and the south campus, surrounded by a medical district, one of the denser neighborhoods within the core of downtown Syracuse, a major urban park, the cemetery and ESF, and as well as some more institutional sites. And so there's a really rich, varied institutional district, and we're really interested in how the university can better integrate with some of these partners in all directions. And you can see up close who the kind of near neighbors are, the Upstate Medical District, the Walnut Park neighborhood, a really important part of the framework, Marshall Street, the question of what's the future of that place, so important for kind of functions and student experience, but maybe not the best quality of environment. And the University neighborhood, a really dense student area, but again, what's the future? How can we better connect to that? So I'm going to move from that kind of foundation of understanding how the university grew over time and got to where we are today, from a physical standpoint at least, into looking at today, looking at the landscape structure and the circulation structure that are in place today. So we'll start at the big scale and then we'll get small. Landscape to us isn't just about the quad outside, it's also about the hydrology, the environment, the topography here, really incredible topography, particularly in the University District, and how those all work together. So if you look at this analysis, if you see green, that means lower slopes, and if you see red, that's a really steep slope. That helps us understand how water flows, where it's easier to build, and where great views are. So you can see that the university is in two of the kind of really steep zones, and the downtown over here is kind of located in a valley. That's not uncommon. You often see that with downtowns. And that kind of topography relates to how water flows. So what's interesting Your two campuses are in two different watersheds, the Onondaga Creek watershed and then the Butternut Creek watershed. The main campus flows, remember we had that image that showed the campus, the city, and Onondaga Lake in the distance, made it look really far away, but they're all connected because the water that falls here on the university flows into the creek and flows into the lake. So it's this connected system. We have to think about the impact of stormwater here on the broader city as well. And we also think at the broad scale about kind of the tree canopy impact, that the campus can be a major contributor to the city in terms of tree plantings and tree canopy, which do a lot for climate control, managing heat island effect, and also capturing and storing rain before it gets to the ground. So if we look at the city as a whole, they have some really aspirational targets for tree canopy, a citywide target of 30%. The city as a whole actually has really fantastic efforts around stormwater management. And so if we look at South Campus, we can see that the campus is achieving that or more, but we know it's a really low density campus, so that's almost an easy one, right? Main campus, on the other hand, is at around 10%. So there's probably room to think about enhancing tree canopy here and then really understanding what that would do for you from an environmental perspective. Of course, it's much harder in denser areas like the main campus and downtown to achieve that, so sometimes there's trade-offs. It's just an overall citywide goal. This is a particularly appropriate slide today, perhaps, as we look at climate impacts and know that Syracuse University is located within an area that's really impacted by lake effect snow and lake effect winds. And after the earlier forum today, we were walking back from here over to Kraus-Heinz Hall right into those northwest winds that you see. So you really feel very acutely all the impacts of the climate analysis here. What it's telling you is that Syracuse is located in a situation where the strongest and coldest winds come from the northwest, and that they're particularly strong during the day, which is interesting. The other thing that I think we should think about is that over time we've been seeing a snowfall increase, and so that's both a result of kind of the lake effect and maybe broader global impacts. So what does that mean for planning a campus where we want to make sure that people can walk comfortably from class to class, indoors and outdoors, but at the same time we do have some really harsh climate realities to deal with. We think that the way we site buildings and the way that we design landscapes can do a lot to mitigate some of those harsher moments. It's a really important thing to think about, though. I know sometimes we wear living in a cold climate as a badge of honor, but we can also soften it a bit. Now I'm going to zoom in a bit, kind of from that big scale of the climate and the hydrology into the main campus and look at some of the more formal landscape typologies here today. So imagine if you had a campus without landscape. Not a great place to be, right? But we start to put together the pieces. If you remember from the historic analysis how important that front lawn is, it's a really formal space and it kind of acts as a threshold to let you know that you're arriving at Syracuse University. It's not a very social space, though. It's not a place that's occupied by a lot of people. You pass through it to get to the campus. The quad, though, can be a social space. It is a social space. We think it could potentially be even more activated, but it really is, you can see sort of geographically the heart of your campus and a great asset to protect. Then throughout the rest of the campus, there's a series of much smaller plazas and courtyards and smaller quads. And what these do, we think, is to build community at a more local level. So you might have a quad in a residential district or over in the sciences district that really helps to build identity and community around certain programs or certain residential areas. So these smaller scale landscapes aren't as iconic, but they're really important for the social fabric. Athletics and rec, not as prominent on the main campus. A different story if we looked at the South Campus where there's a lot of rec fields and athletic fields. We're trying to think about how we could maybe make sure that recreation is part of the experience of the main campus. So we don't want to build too much that we don't allow space for recreation and release easily within proximity. But there are a couple sites today where you can do that. We know this is a really highly coveted field. And then, although we might not think of it in the same way we think of the quad, the parking and the service spaces are really important parts of the landscape too. And you can see just looking at this map how much is gray. That's a lot of space for parking. So we want to think really carefully about the location of it, the impression of it. If it's at the front door, maybe it's very accessible, but it's not very welcoming. So what are the trade-offs in terms of making sure that parking is adequately served, but not the only thing that you're providing? We also think that roads and sidewalks and streets are all also part of the landscape structure. If you go to a city and you look at a city, it's actually about 20% of the city's land are roads. And so they're really important. They're a really important opportunity for identity as well because they're important gateway corridors. And that doesn't mean that all roads are created equal. So you can see a very special type of street around Marshall Street, much more of a pedestrian scale, for example, than Comstock or others. And the connective corridor, which has recently been highlighted as another special street. And then finally, the transitional space. This is kind of what's left over, but it can serve a lot of functions for us, and this is something that we're interested in digging into more, because if we look, well, we'll go to that in a moment, but transitional space is actually about 30% of your total landscape spaces on campus. It could be doing a lot more for you in terms of stormwater management, thinking about ways to create connections, so we'll be looking at that as we move forward to ideas. And just as important as sort of understanding how those spaces work and function is really the character of them today. So you have the front lawn with incredible established trees and great tree canopy, great for shade and informal studying. You have much more formal plazas like the Orange Grove, a recent investment that really kind of creates identity along the quad. And then back to Marshall Street, but how it looks on the ground, you can see the impression that an investment in brick pavers or pavers in the street really signals that this is a place for people to be, not just cars. So where are those special pedestrian streets where we might want to symbolize that elsewhere on campus? Maybe University Place, something that's been shut off more to cars lately, and so still feels like it's designed for cars though, not people, right? Is there a possibility to have more of a blend? And then the connective corridor, which is really about bringing in new types of movement to campus. Bikes, we heard a lot from bikers in the earlier forum. So there's ways that you can create infrastructure on campus, like the connective corridor, but even more that would help to incentivize and encourage bike riding. And here's that transitional space. You can see why it's called transitional. You can't throw a Frisbee here. You're probably not going to sit down and study, but you can imagine that all the stormwater runs down here, and so how could we imagine that we could capture some of that, manage it, clean it, and help prevent it from getting to Onondaga Lake so quickly? The different landscape spaces also have different characters, so some are really active, some much more passive, but I think it's really important to think about the identity of each and how they all kind of add up to your campus. Here's that graph where you see how important that transitional space is, 30% of your overall. And again, how important parking and service is. So, are there ways that we could better utilize that too? And what would it mean to transition more to structured parking? I'm gonna jump, or maybe it's not a jump because we've been talking about streets and roads, but move over to talking more about circulation and connectivity on the campus. So this is about how the Syracuse University connects not just within it, but broadly to the city and to the region. And although we saw in the images of I-81 that it was a disruptive investment in the city fabric, it's also a great asset for you because it makes you so well connected more broadly to the region. And we know that Syracuse is functioning as a two-campus system, and so one of the key questions is how do you connect better the South Campus to the main campus? I-81 is part of that, Comstock is a huge part of that, so we're thinking a lot about these important connections. both programmatically and then also physically. Another important part of thinking about circulation is the idea of gateways. And what we're showing here in these blue arrows are where we think kind of the gateways are to campus. Well, it's pretty clear where the established boundaries of campus are. That doesn't always correspond to a gateway. Sometimes it feels like you're arriving at campus a lot sooner than you actually are, or you'll get to a campus building far north on University Avenue, but it doesn't feel like it fits into the campus. So how do we start to think about where those gateways are and what improvements could be made to kind of symbolize when you're arriving? We heard this morning too, and another important gateway is from the neighborhood to the east, Euclid Avenue, a critical one. And the character of some of those gateway streets doesn't always look like it's part of an academic environment. So this is one of the Comstock Avenue gateways, and another moment along Comstock, which looks, in this case and the other one, a little bit more suburban than part of a really vibrant urban campus. So what could we do to imagine this as a place where bikers belong as well, or that kind of symbolizes through signage or through other design elements that you're at Syracuse University? Similarly, here we are in Skytop Road. We remember that this part of campus developed really quickly as a response to a growing population, and today we have much more suburban development here. I think we have a huge opportunity to rethink the South Campus, the character of it, the use of it, and then kind of how we think about the circulation system as well. You can see here, no sidewalk. So what does that say to a pedestrian about where to walk and whether they're welcome there? It's a really different story, though, when we get to certain parts of the downtown campus, or the main campus. And here we are at the edge of campus near the medical district, a much tighter street zone. And so you really feel like you're part of an active area, maybe too active, actually, if you're walking by this construction site. But you can see much denser development. We have the impact of parking garages. It's a really different feel. So you need kind of a different toolkit for each place. And then here again on Adams Street, thinking about how do we have great streetscapes amidst surface parking lots or parking garages. Big challenges for urban design, but something that we're looking at through redevelopment opportunities. And you can see that bike lanes and certain street lights have also tried to tackle that. The shuttle is something we heard a lot about through the My Campus survey. I don't know if hopefully a lot of people here took that. Something I think that we're thinking a lot about in terms of how to improve amenities to make it more comfortable to ride or more comfortable on a day like today to wait for the shuttle, and also to increase the frequency. Something that happens over time with shuttle routes is that they always tend to expand. So if you start out with a point-to-point system, another development will happen and you'll add a loop and you'll add a loop. So ultimately it becomes really inefficient. Sometimes it's good to pause and think about what the most ideal and efficient route would be. Really one of the key things that you're trying to do with your shuttle is to get from the South Campus to the main campus. And so are there ways that we can make that and other goals for the shuttle more efficient? And then the City Bicycle Network. We've been meeting with the city and the county planners to try to understand what their goals are around street changes and align some of Syracuse's improvements with that. So improvements to the campus bike network want to be knit right into what the city already has constructed or has planned. You can see an example too of one of the tests for a design of a bike track. And if we look at a street section more closely, we'll start to see all the different pieces that make up each of those images we were just looking at. So it's not as simple as just adding a bike lane to a street. We know that has impacts on parking, it has impacts on the tree verge, has impacts on the size of the lanes. And so we have to think about the street actually as the whole space from building to building, and then understand what the opportunities are within it. Opportunities for biking, for safe pedestrian access, adequate parking, and then also stormwater management. So this is an example of what's already been done on University Ave through the connective corridor. On Waverly, though, I think we see more opportunities than examples quite yet. And so, our job is really to reimagine the buildings as well as the space between them. And we're starting to do that and hopefully coming up with some exciting ideas to bring you next time. Similarly, on Comstock, you can see now how exaggerated and wide that street section is. So what that gives, it makes it hard to create a sense of place there or a tight urban environment, but it also gives a lot of opportunity for additional plantings and for flexibility within the whole street section. For those of you who took the My Campus, this is one of the outputs, looking at pedestrian flows through and around the main campus. And you can see that there's some streets that are really important. University Place, Waverly, this zone of Marshall Street where everybody has to go to Starbucks. And then Euclid Avenue, so a really important pedestrian spine to the east. What that tells us is that there is a pretty legible hierarchy to the street network for pedestrians, and you can see that that's tied very frequently to housing. So as we think about new housing sites or new housing districts, that's really going to impact the flow of people across campus, and we have to think also about better connections. For example, we know that there are some existing housing on West Campus, but it's quite difficult to get back and forth. So how do we use this master plan to make some of those connections better? Parking, if you look at this map, I think what's most striking is that the core of campus is fairly free of parking today. There's not a significant amount of parking in the core, and that's a really efficient way to be laid out. We can see that instead there's these zones of parking, with West Campus being a huge reservoir for parking today. West Campus is also a huge opportunity for future development, so we'll have to think really carefully about if we redevelop those sites, what do we do with parking? What's our strategy? And the same thing is true of South Campus. A lot of parking here today as well. Are there opportunities for remote parking in the future if we consolidate and redevelop? We want to think of the whole system of parking collectively, Main and South Campus. So I'm going to move from a really physical look at the campus to looking a little bit more at how those physical spaces function on a daily basis. We call that sort of the student experience, because students come here to get an education, but there's a lot of phases of student development that happen outside of the classroom too, that happen in residential halls or that happen in what we call kind of soft spaces on campus. Campuses are spaces that are less programmed. Here, if you look at student life spaces, cafes, dining, study spaces, you'll see that they're actually scattered all over campus. So you can find a niche in a lot of places. The Student Center Shine, I think, is a question for this master plan to think about. How do we make that a better place? And what is the future of the Student Center at Syracuse University? What does it want to be? How does it want to change or evolve? So as we think about that, I think we want to think too about this distributed system where student life is well distributed across campus. Maybe you have a hub, but you also have these satellites. And we want to look inside the buildings too and understand how some of the public spaces within buildings are also part of that network of social spaces. So if you see the yellow and the red colors within, those are spaces that are hallways, lobbies, places that are more public and can be shared between users. So imagine that you could maybe reinvigorate some of these soft spaces. I think that's what we mean by soft spaces, to create more lounges, more flexible study space, more distributed study space across the campus where you could imagine more interaction happens. We see a lot of innovation happen around interaction, and so can we create spaces that allow that in a lot more pockets of the university? There's also been recent investment in these maker spaces, which could function in that way as well. I think we've thrown a lot of diagrams and a lot of data at you, so what I'm going to try to do is wrap it all together, and then we'll take some questions. We look at all that information so that we can start to form a framework and start to understand what pieces of the Syracuse campus are fixed, are sacred, really need to be protected. What are those that we think need improvement and enhancement? And then where are there opportunities? Where today can we see that there's a place that just really needs to be improved and rethought? So if we go back to the history, I think that's really a foundational piece of Syracuse campus's framework. remembering the Hall of Languages and the strong connection to University Ave. Today you have the connective corridor of University Ave and the very first building on campus. So it's a great meeting of old and new. And then, equally part of that is the front lawn and the old row that kind of presents that front door. But what's the role of University Place? How does University Place become more a part of a social place, a part of that front lawn, and not just a pass-through space? We think that's a huge opportunity, especially as it relates to University Avenue and the investment there. And then Walnut Park, also an important part of that coming into the east side of campus. So we have this setup of all these kind of important armatures and important historic moments. But then amidst that, we also have a really interesting student life row that has evolved slowly over time, I think in not necessarily in a formal way, but in an informal way, formed along Waverly Avenue between Waverly and University Place. You have the library, you have Shine, you have this really big anchor of a lot of student-driven activity, but it's actually not a great environment, right? The Shine building could use a lot of love. The library, the Byrd Library also, there's been some investments, but maybe we could think about that even more. It doesn't have a great facade onto Waverly Avenue, so if that's going to be an important street that Syracuse makes an impression with, maybe we want to rethink these two really important student functions along Waverly. And then you can see also what's associated with big buildings like that is a lot of service. So it's a necessary evil, but we have parking, we have service circulation, and it kind of compounds the confusion of pedestrian access and the impression. And here you can see that plays out the front door of Shine and right across from a parking garage. We see a little bit of the same characteristics on University Avenue. There's been a great investment in that street, but at the same time, it's kind of a mix of quality of facades, a parking garage, circulation for access to the hotel, a lot of underutilized open spaces in the front lawns, kind of a bigger setback than we would necessarily expect. And so can we rethink some of these sites or some of the open spaces between the buildings and the street to make that also part of the great front door up to the campus and up to the Hall of Languages. West Campus, I think, is for us also one of those big opportunity areas. It is, of course, a place with a lot of parking today, also a lot of housing, a place that's disconnected from the campus core. But if we're talking about reinvestment potentially in the dome and the real important anchor of the university's academic core, this is in such close proximity. It's a huge opportunity to think about what the character of this place is and the future uses. We also know that the state is thinking about I-81, and so that will be part of redefining this campus edge. When you look at it together, I think we're starting to see a picture of a really intact and lovely academic core to the university, academic and historic core, and some strong opportunities for reinvestment at the edges. So rethinking how the university starts to meet the city north of Waverly, rethinking the West Campus district and thinking about how we can create more community there. And then also on the east side, where we have pockets of housing today, how can we reinforce that and better knit that into the core of campus? We're going to be working on those questions over the next month or so, and then coming back to you at an open house forum in April. So we'll look forward to getting your ideas and getting feedback on our ideas at that point. That'll be when we come together about the third week in April. What we're going to do between now and then is to really kind of hone in and define some principles that will drive all of your decisions in the physical environment going forward. So those are principles of sustainability, of alignment with the academic strategic plan, of the student life experience. We're going to be working on firming those up and bringing them back to you for confirmation. Thinking about a program, to us a program is what needs to grow, what needs to be reinvested in, what are the pieces of the campus that are going to change. So we'll be coming back with that as well, and some options for future growth and development. So with that, I want to thank you all for coming and also hope that we have some brave people in the audience to ask questions. I think we have a couple of mics.
Is this on?
Sounds on.
Okay. Your first slide that showed population trends was truncated at 2010, and then there was a projection forward, both for the city, which had a horizontal projection, and the university, which had a steeply increasing projection. Now, we know that one of the most serious problems we confront right now is overpopulation of the university. We had rapid, uncontrolled, ill-planned expansion of the student population. We cannot handle the students we have now. And so my question to you is, can you explain to us why you chose a horizontal projection for the city's population and a sharply increasing population projection for the university?
So I think hopefully what I can do is clarify the drawing, and that was maybe a misleading part of the drawing with the arrow. I think what we did with the with both of those lines was to kind of pull what was happening in the last 10 years forward. So it's, you know, we saw this period of stabilization in the city in the past decade or so, and then, like you said, we've seen this sharper increase in the university. So it's not to say that we're projecting that or recommending that for the university going forward. In fact, I think what we've heard is, as you're suggesting, more of a stabilization as well. That path is just kind of reporting on the most recent trend.
Well, if I could just make one follow-up comment, there's a lot of explicit recognition of the need to reduce the size of the student population so that we can deliver what we have led our students and prospective students to believe they will receive if they come to an expensive private university. And therefore, in keeping with the Chancellor's affirmation that one of our objectives is to be better but smaller, then perhaps for planning purposes that student SU population projection should actually have a downward slope. And this can affect how we think about physical space and physical planning.
I think you're right that the quality, not quantity mantra is one that we have heard a lot through interviews and through looking at spaces, that we want to reinforce quality. It's not necessarily about sheer growth, you know, net growth. And I think another important piece about enrollment as a whole is that this physical plan is happening in parallel and coordination with the academic strategic plan. And so goals around enrollment will be rolled into that too. And then this will be a flexible framework within which the university could grow or could contract in order to meet the goals of the academic strategic plan. Thank you.
Have you had any chance to identify areas of expansion for the university, for additional academic buildings?
It's hard for us not to go there to think about that, because that's the fun stuff, right? Thinking about the future. So I think what's clear to us is the university is quite fortunate to own a lot of land. Despite being within a dense urban area, you actually have been strategic and have a lot of land ownership, much of it contiguous or at least proximate to the academic core. I don't have a map up here, but we've been looking, I think, at thinking about academic expansion as wanting to be as close as possible to that academic core to reinforce that. We know there's also some academic that's also been, north of University Place. So we're thinking about different ways that A, you could reinforce the core, and then B, are there strategic additional moves? that'll be part of the options that we come back with in April, much more clear depictions of that.
This one works? What would you like to hear me sing? I said, is it not correct that in some cases we'll be looking to replace certain existing structures? So it isn't necessarily that the university will be looking to add square footage. I think it'll be looking to look at the quality of the square footage that it provides, whether it be instructional, research, recreation, any other type of space that we have. I think one of Sasaki's initial findings was that perhaps we have a sufficient amount of square footage. It's just that some of the buildings that we have perhaps are not prepared to take us further into the 21st century, which may be that on some of our sites we may take down some of the buildings that currently exist. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think we've looked at every building and tried to understand how it's functioning for you today in terms of its current use, and then also what its opportunities are for repositioning if it's not functioning well. So it's always the most sustainable thing you can always do is to reuse or reinvest in an existing building. If you can't, though, or there's strategic reasons, I think some buildings might come down. It's not necessarily about expanding exponentially. It's about smart investment and reinvestment in the core.
Now, the university has a real 24-hour life, and on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights, we tend to see literally thousands of students make their way off campus into the neighborhood, many of them aimlessly looking for something to do. And I know you talk a little bit about the student center as not being necessarily inviting. I'm just wondering if you're looking at the 24-hour nature of the university, not only for the academic purposes and the recreational purposes, but also the free time, which in many cases is 80% of the time that students aren't in the classroom.
Right. I think, yeah, and that's part of why we're so interested in that idea of the soft spaces, which you could also think of as your soft time. Where do you go when you have choices? And we've heard a lot about the challenges with the activities or quality of environment in some of the off-campus neighborhoods. So what can the university do? Some of that's about housing. I think a lot of universities, their response is to build more housing and house more campuses or more students on campus. That's one option. Like you're saying, some of it's about activities. So I think that's definitely a big part of it.
I live in the university campus and I walk along Euclid, which is one area you said this morning was brought up, but it wasn't in your slides. And one thing I noticed is that the sidewalks during the winter are not maintained. And I understand that the university is not going to take that on, but I wonder if, because in just the realization that there's so many students living along Euclid Avenue, can the university put any pressure on landlords to maintain those sidewalks? Because you can see in the morning droves of students and in the afternoon walking along on the street because the sidewalks are impassable. The other thing is that when you mention about roads, the crossing at Euclid and Comstock, the pedestrian light is just, you see students and everybody just crossing whenever they have a chance because the pedestrian light is not very friendly to pedestrians. They would just have to sit and wait for, a long, long time before you get the signal. While in the Waverly University Ave, pedestrian lights are very good for pedestrians. So I wonder if that's something that you're taking into account in this plan.
I think, so you're talking about the idea that we talked about a lot, that the campus isn't just its compact boundaries. It's not just the land it owns. It's also extends into the neighborhoods around it, and the streets are important. So we're definitely thinking about that relationship between what is the campus proper and what is the neighborhood around it. It's challenged sometimes by property ownership, and it's easier to make changes on land that you control than on partnership areas. But there's a lot of precedence for what other universities have done to work with landlords or to work with to work with other institutional partners or something like that to bring up the quality or the maintenance of certain areas. And it seems like from our conversations that that's very much about dialogue. So I think it's an important point, and definitely the master plan is looking at not just the campus proper, but everything that connects around it.
Quick question. With traffic flow, but kind of following along on traffic flow, how did you incorporate the delivery truck traffic flow? There seems to be, with some of the new traffic patterns, there's these bottlenecks that are created, mostly on the east side of campus, Waverly and University Ave, heading north. How do you incorporate that into your traffic flow?
We look at it mostly on the university perspective from a loading and unloading needs. There's certain buildings that have major demands in terms of loading and unloading, and that can impact some of that. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, or if you're talking about maybe impacts from the medical district as well, or from outside of the university. But we'll be looking really carefully at the service zone, which is the loading and unloading areas of certain buildings, as we think about changes to them. I think it's a really important part, because you're right, if it interrupts the pedestrian experience or the front door experience, it has a really strong impact.
So something that I think you've touched on a lot, specifically with the front door experience and sort of how the experience of entering the university is, and something that we should think about in this process is the experience of prospective students as well as current students, right? And as families who are going to invest, right, as Sam mentioned, right, how are we going to make this university look when these prospective families come and visit? So that's everything from the parking to ultimately the space that they enter into, the space that they sit when they talk to the students and those who are sharing the information with them. So I think something that we need to work on at this phase of the process is what happens right now, and how can we make that a better experience for those families, because we know that the campus visit is often the most important part in consideration of where a student attends college.
That's a good point, and we've heard, I think, this is maybe anecdotal, but that people kind of make a decision or make a judgment about a place within the first 10 minutes, right? So that first impression is hugely important. That's a really good point.
Hi, so I have three things. First of all, you talked about how people enter campus. Have you actually ridden the Connective Corridor bus?
No, I haven't.
So if you ride the buses or if you try to get to campus, those aren't the ways you get to campus, even as a visitor. And so you really should spend time talking to people how they enter campus, because it may not be what you think. Those are actually the routes that people avoid.
The bus routes are, yeah.
The routes that you have listed as the front door of campus aren't the way we tell people to come here.
Oh, the gateway, okay.
So that's one thing I think you should investigate. Secondly, you talk about the number of parking spaces, and oftentimes there are surveys talking about, do you drive to campus, do you walk to campus, do you whatever. Something that you don't have influence over, but you might try to figure out how you can have influence, is actual bus service to campus. So I would love to take the bus to campus. The bus to campus comes from my neighborhood at 8 o'clock in the morning. There's not another one for the entire day until, and if I work late, I can't do the bus. So you could actually relieve parking spaces if bus service to campus was much more friendly.
Right, at the city scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the last thing is that we tend to look at campus as a place for undergrads. We forget that campus is a place for graduate students. And so when you talk about foot traffic and graduate students, these are people who are coming to campus oftentimes in the evenings for classes and leaving at 8 o'clock at night to get back to their car or get back to a bus back to their car. and think about where they walk. Is it safe?
Mhm.
Does it slope? All those different things is something that I think we tend to ignore.
That's a good point. And if we think about the parking on West Campus as sort of a more isolated side, if we start to make that a more vibrant place, can you start to make the campus edges feel more safe? Oftentimes safety is about having people in a place 24/7, whether it's good activity or not. And so, so that I think is about maybe developing some of those campus edges. It's a good point.
I think it's me, yeah. I was interested in what you were saying about Waverly, because I agree, it's a very difficult, it's not a very good impression, I think, especially when you consider that getting into Shine from anything except the front entrance is almost impossible if you're disabled. There's long, steep staircases most of the time, which are very difficult to negotiate, even in the best of weather, but really, really difficult in snow if you're not, if you're differently abled. And then the other thing is I was a little bit perturbed by your just talking about the facade of Byrd Library. I hope you're looking at everything that goes on in Byrd Library as well, because it has certainly outgrown, we need a 21st century library on this campus, and what goes on inside Byrd can't accommodate that. I know that there is nobody from the library who's actually on the committee that's advising you, but I hope that there are people who are advising you from the library and therefore making those points.
That's a good point. I think we are thinking of Byrd as needing kind of an interior renovation, but also having this major opportunity for maybe it's a renovation plus an addition that kind of helps you to meet those 21st century needs. A major renovation.
I
Thank you.
It's like a rebuilding.
I'm wondering about disability access. This campus has made many improvements in the last 30 years, but is still a fairly difficult place for people with disabilities. We have more and more students that have needs that I'm hoping you're taking into consideration.
We are certainly trying to, and so we'll take more feedback if there is specific areas or comments that you could tell us about, because that's always helpful. But we are trying through this plan to kind of find ways to make improvements through landscape or new buildings that could help to leap forward a little bit in that, because it can be a very expensive incremental project if you do it, just building by building. So maybe some of these new investments could sort of catalyze steeper improvements. We're definitely trying to think about that, and that's come up a lot. Just being conscious of time to those who are trickling out and need to, just thank you all for coming today.
I wanted to echo the comments about Byrd Library and Waverly and the front door, the facade aspect of that, because Byrd being built in the 70s is rampant with remediation issues and just needs to really be functionally thought of in a much different way to accommodate both undergraduate, graduate, and the various activities and the things that Lou talked about in terms of carrying us forward farther into the 21st century. Just the inability to functionally create or add more power to more internet wireless zones within the building itself. It simply is, outlived its really functional usefulness to expand beyond where it is right now. So in terms of thinking about all of those utilization factors and the front door gateway aspect of where Byrd happens to reside, how, are there other conversations going on about how that might be treated?
I think we haven't gotten to the level of detail where we're programming what might happen in there in the future quite yet, but it's pretty clear through conversations that, as you guys have been saying, Bird Library is in need of rethinking inside and out. And so, you know, we're at the point right now where we're starting to germinate and bring up all the different ideas. And then as we hone in on the very specific ideas, we'll get to go into that type of detail.
Yeah, because its gate count right now is about 1.3 million annually, and that's about 26,000 people a week, which is more than the population of the university itself. So it is obviously, you know, a place to get utilized a lot.
Yeah, really critical, I think, both functionally and then, like you've been saying too, kind of this critical location. So
Well,
really good
critical
point.
mix of spaces, you know, as you explore throughout the campus, the other critical kinds of spaces that really make the university function and grow into the 21st century.
It's an exciting project because we've seen at a lot of other campuses how rethinking a library can be transformative. It is one of the more transformative projects that touches everybody. So good point.
The university is also invested in some other, a warehouse that I didn't see on your map, the Lincoln Warehouse. I didn't see that highlighted, and I didn't see that, so I don't know what the position is there. And also, we're renting properties that we don't own, but that we're using. What kinds of, has that also been incorporated into your planning?
It has been, yeah. So are you talking about the warehouse building downtown? The Lincoln building. And that's an ownership one. We have been looking at leased properties, trying to figure out, I think one of the pieces of this is to look at space moves a little bit. What programs need to be together that are apart, what programs are maybe located far apart from people that they might collaborate with. And so part of that is looking at the leases too, as well as the properties that are owned to understand the full picture. I think also, you know, when it comes to certain things, like there's some leased properties that are housing, some are academic, so there's a administrative, there's a whole range, and we need to get a hold on kind of what the strategic goal is for each of those uses, not come at it just from the property perspective, but understand what the strategic goal is for housing or for that particular department before we think about their move. But we are looking at leased properties as well.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your time today. So one thing, and I came a few minutes late, so I apologize if this was in your deck. One thing that I was wondering about is sort of the state of classrooms and 21st century classrooms, and really your analysis about that and where you see us heading, whether they're bigger or smaller, or how active learning pertains to that, or project-based learning. Are you looking into that and sort of establishing a framework around those concepts?
We are, and we're actually really interested at our firm kind of intellectually in those questions. We always learn from universities about those issues when we work with them. I think we do a space analysis at the beginning of the process that does look at the size of the classrooms you have and their current utilization. And so we do try to think about how the current configuration of classrooms matches how people are teaching now, how they want to be teaching in the future. And we rely a little bit on the university to tell us what their goals are around teaching. So as Lou said at the beginning, we met with the deans, and we have members of academic representatives on our committee trying to make sure that we are aligning future classrooms with your specific needs. It's true for labs as well, but looking at all of those. And sometimes we find that, you know, requests around size don't always line up with what we see in the analysis, so it's complex, but we are looking at all types of teaching spaces.
Given the timeline that you discussed early, is there a sense then that preservation or a recapturing of the past is part of what you're looking at?
I think that recapture, Well, I feel like the past is pretty well captured on your campus, so maybe it's more of a don't abandon what's great here and figure out a way that it can be part of the future, that the past and the future can coexist, which they do in many ways today. But it's clear, as we talk about Bird Library or we talk about Shine, there are some buildings that haven't transitioned from their origins to today that well, and so we do need to think about bringing certain areas up to the future without losing the past. I'll keep going till Lou tells me to stop, so, okay.
Hi. Is there any thought given to potentially moving traffic from graduate students to the downtown area or connecting them via bus routes somehow to spur demand for the small businesses there and some of the residential housing in the downtown neighborhood?
So your question is about how to better connect downtown to the core campus?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we are interested in that, both in terms of what uses are downtown today and in the future, and then how do we make that connection. A lot of the bus lines that Syracuse University relies on are city lines, and so some of that is has to be negotiated through the city, as was mentioned, and there's some challenges with that. But if that's a major route and there's a need there, yes, we're looking at that. That's good to know.
I think another point that you guys should also look at is the different mechanical systems on the campus. And I think it'll be interesting to look.
Oh, sorry, I think we have two questions at once. It's like a chorus. We'll do maybe the back and then we'll come to you in the front.
I have a question about the Shine Student Center. I've worked in the building for 2 years, and clearly, even though it's one of the newer buildings on campus, it clearly needs a lot of attention. But it also gets a very large amount of traffic through the building on a daily basis when school's in session. So I was wondering what the options were being considered for the future of the Shine.
I think that's one of the critical pieces in the master plan, and so part of me wants to encourage you to come back in April to see kind of more visually and in more detail what we're thinking about. It's a little premature, I think, for me to say my idea quite yet because it hasn't been vetted, but we're looking at all types of options. You could imagine a wholesale reinvention of what the student center means on Syracuse's campus, who's in it, are there people across campus right now who need to be there, who aren't there? So we need to think about who needs to be in that building, and then I think building on that, understand physically what it wants to be. I think it's not giving away too much to say that it's one of the core drivers of student life and the future, and so we'll be looking at that a lot in the options.
I was just going to say that it'd be interesting to look at the mechanical systems that are existing right now, and also how to expand it. For example, like the pavement heating system that's I think around Archbold, and see how that can be expanded. And I think that can also solve the problem that was brought up previously about snow on the pathways, and maybe that way we could use less salt, and that causes less wear and tear. Maybe that way we can also start recycling the rainwater because the salt wouldn't wear down the mechanical systems. I think also another question I have is if we were to rebuild or renovate Bird and Shine, how would the existing activities be replaced, and where would location be right now in mind?
I don't think I know yet, but one thing that both of your questions triggered was the question of phasing and understanding that both of those buildings are so critical to everyday functions on the campus, so we'll have to think really carefully about any changes to them that might take part of that space, offline for a period of time while renovations are done or improvements are done. So phasing will be a huge part of how we think about those two sites and how we make decisions. If you guys have more feedback, I think, on either of those, the student life perspective, since we know it's so important, I would encourage you to go to the Fast Forward Syracuse website, and there's a menu where you can put your ideas in. We'll be getting those and trying to incorporate them too.
I was just wondering, for buildings that have certain departments in them that may not fit well into the departments, is that something that you're thinking about and considering? I mean, have you been asking about maybe they've historically gone into that space, but they aren't really the best fit for that space? I'm thinking of the Setner School of Music being in an unsoundproofed building so that there's no soundproofing between the different classrooms, and it's very, very difficult actually for teaching events to happen because everything is bleeding through. That's just an example. I'm sure there are others on campus. Is that one of the things that you're considering?
That is, yeah, making sure that I think everybody has the right and kind of a high quality space, trying to improve the evenness of quality across all spaces, right, and all programs. So the building you're talking about, the Krause building, has come up a lot with the problems it has for acoustics. That's also an issue for a lot of science programs and wet labs, that they're now in buildings that really can't be retrofitted, or it would be hugely costly to retrofit them for some of the modern needs of wet labs. And so it's kind of the same thing, trying to make sure that the building best meets the need of the program. We don't want the building to drive what you're able to do in it. We want it the other way around.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming. I can assure you that Sasaki's probably the best listening organization I've encountered, and the reason we have them here is because they're probably the best in the business in terms of putting together a campus master plan. So I think we'll be very fortunate when we receive this information. I hope everyone comes back in April. And the key takeaways, I think, to understand is the campus framework, campus master plan really has to be supportive and hand in hand with the academic strategic plan. Sasaki, as I said, has been very good listeners. If for some reason